So good morning. A few weeks ago, Doug asked a question about emptiness in Buddhism, and I gave a 2-second answers, but I wanted to really, it occurred to me that it would be useful to dig into it a little more deeply because it's an important concept. And it's a term that is often misunderstood or confused in the West as it relates to Buddhist teachings. And it's because it means something very different from our usual understanding of it. I mean, if we talk about emptiness, it's like there's nothing there. But that's not how it's seen in Buddhism. It is viewed in the West as either an obscure and esoteric teaching, which it really is not. So this morning I want to dig into it a little more deeply and try to clarify its meaning and hopefully remove some of the mystery that sometimes surrounds the term. But let me begin by saying that the concept of emptiness is really one of the more important and central teachings in Buddhism. And at first glance, often people think, well, it's about nihilism or the denial of existence or some other sort of negative connotation. But in reality, it's a profound and liberating insight about the nature of reality. This is a quote from Miranda Shaw. She's a retired Dharma teacher who taught for many years at the University of Richmond. She taught Buddhism there in the School of Religion. And she says, quote, "Emptiness is not a denial of existence, but a subtler perspective that all phenomena are impermanent and interrelated. Emptiness is not a denial of existence, but a subtler perspective that all phenomena are impermanent and interrelated." So let's look at her quote, maybe try to dissect it a little bit. And I begin by saying that the teaching on emptiness is not meant to lead us to despair. It's rather intended to guide us toward wisdom, compassion, and freedom by once again offering us a way to see things clearly as they truly are. So to understand emptiness in the Buddhist context, and especially if we're going to talk about it in a more practical way, it's helpful to consider the two familiar key ideas that are embedded in the quote, and those are impermanence and interdependence, interconnectedness. And as you know, because we talk about it here often, these are not just abstract philosophical concepts. They are truths that can be observed in our everyday lives. The first aspect of emptiness that we'll start with is recognizing the impermanence of all phenomena. Everything we encounter, as you know, our bodies, our emotions, our possessions, our relationships, and even our thoughts are in a constant state of flux. All are impermanent. Nothing remains the same from one moment to the next. A good example there is consider a flower. It blooms in full beauty, but in a few days its petals wither, they fall off. It's just not a lasting thing. But this impermanence is not a defect. It is the very nature of existence. And it's the same for all things in our lives, including ourselves, as we talked about last week when we addressed mortality. Practically speaking, the recognition of impermanence is a powerful way to help us let go of clinging and attachment. So much of our suffering arises because we resist change. We resist impermanence. We desperately try to hold on to things, our youth, our loved ones, our possessions, our whatevers. The more we hold on, the more we suffer, as though these things could be fixed and unchanging, as though our wish for them to be fixed and unchanging would come true. When we truly understand and accept impermanence, we begin to see and accept that change is inevitable. It is a constant in our lives. And when we truly accept this, it brings us peace because we stop fighting the natural flow of life. For example, when we experience the loss of a loved one, the pain is overwhelming. And while this grief is natural and it's unavoidable, the Buddhist perspective reminds us, the Buddhist perspective on impermanence reminds us that life itself is a cycle of arising and passing away. So yes, we're consumed by the loss, but we learn from the notion of impermanence to cherish the time we shared with that person, to honor the impermanence as part of the larger fabric of life. Now, that doesn't erase our pain by any stretch, but it allows us to meet our pain with greater wisdom, greater spaciousness, and greater equanimity. So that's the impermanence that's embedded in the concept of emptiness. The second key understanding of emptiness is interdependence. Remember, the Buddha taught that nothing exists independently. Everything arises due to causes and conditions. This principle, which we've talked about in the past, is known as dependent origination. It's just a fancy phrase to say that everything arises, everything's connected, everything arises due to causes and conditions. Just take, for example, a tree which depends on sunlight, water, soil to grow. So too are our lives, shaped by countless factors, past and present. Our families, our communities, our nutrition, our environment, the actions of others, the list goes on and on. To see interdependence in action, consider something as simple as a loaf of bread. It starts with the farmer who grew the wheat, the workers who harvested the wheat, the factory workers who milled the flour, the truck drivers who transported the baked bread, the baker who brought it to life, the stock clerk who put it on the shelf, the checkout clerk who put it through their scanner, and on and on. Even the rain and the soil and the sunshine are essential contributors. A loaf of bread is the sum total of all those causes and conditions, and that is true about everything. That was another one of the Buddha's most brilliant insights. The bread is not an isolated object, but a manifestation of countless interconnected causes and conditions. And I find this teaching, this concept, incredibly spacious. It really sort of takes the blinders off, and helps us see the big world. Embracing this understanding of interdependence helps us cultivate humility and gratitude. When we truly realize and accept how much we rely on others and the world around us, I think it becomes much easier to cultivate compassion and kindness. We see that our actions don't occur in isolation, but they ripple outward. We're all impacting each other all the time and affecting others in ways we're not even aware of. Just a small act of generosity, for instance, smiling at a stranger, can uplift someone's day, and that positivity in turn can spill into someone else, and on and on and on. Everything is interconnected, causes and conditions. And we begin to see then how profound a concept emptiness truly is, that nothing is full or exists independently. And that's what the Buddha meant by it, that nothing is on its own a separate entity. Because interdependence, like impermanence, also challenges the illusion of a fixed, separate self. We often think of ourselves as independent individuals, but this is a misunderstanding. Our thoughts, emotions, and identities are shaped by the sum total of our interactions with the world and everyone and everything in it. And what I think, when we really embrace this and really contemplate this notion, it reduces the self-centeredness of the ego. It takes us out of this notion that we have all this agency to just be how we want in the world and change the world in the way we want it to be. It helps open us to deeper relationships with others because we see the interconnectedness. We see that we're all part of a whole. So when we bring together the insights of impermanence and interdependence, we really begin to understand what the Buddha meant by emptiness. It does not mean that things do not exist. It does not mean in his teaching that things are devoid of meaning. Rather, it means that things do not exist in a fixed, independent way we often assume. They're not fixed because they're impermanent, and they're not independent because of interconnectedness. Everything is impermanent. Everything is interrelated. constantly arising and passing away due to causes and conditions. And he never intended, the Buddha, I don't think, for this to be merely an intellectual understanding. He meant it for us to embrace it, to transform how we live, how we exist in the world. Because by seeing things through the lens of emptiness, we free ourselves from so many of the mental habits that cause suffering. Things like clinging to stuff as if they're permanent, grasping at a solid sense of who we are, resisting change. These are all rooted, all these sources of suffering and more are rooted in a misunderstanding of reality. When we let go of our attachment to these beliefs, we discover a profound sense of freedom and ease, partly because we don't have to work so hard trying to control everything. And out of that becomes a spaciousness and greater joy. So just take, for example, how often we cling to our identities, our roles as parents, our roles as friends, our roles as professionals, our gender roles. While they're important, they're not fixed or absolute. When we hold them too tightly, we feel threatened when they change or when anyone challenges them. You mean I'm not that? Well, how dare you say I'm not that? Children grow up, careers shift, relationships evolve, things are in a constant state of flux. By recognizing the emptiness, as the Buddha described it, of these roles, we engage with them fully in the present moment without becoming prisoners of them. We become rigid when we try to hold on to too tight a version of ourselves. Now, practicing this notion of emptiness, the insight, doesn't mean we withdraw from the world. It invites us, to the contrary, to engage with life more fully and authentically. So how do we do this? I mean, what are the sort of practical ways to embody this teaching on emptiness? Well, first, we do what we often do with our mindfulness. We observe our thoughts and feelings as they arise. And when we do that, we notice how they arise and pass away. They are temporary, like clouds moving through the sky. This helps us see the impermanent and interdependent nature of everything. We also pay attention to the interconnectedness of our lives. When we sit down to eat a meal, we reflect on all the people and all the conditions that made that meal possible, and we feel gratitude for that. The farmers, the truck drivers, the preparers, the grocery clerks, the list goes on and on. Just because we went to the store and bought that meal doesn't mean we're solely responsible for it. Third, through the practice of emptiness, we let go of attachment to outcomes. Instead of clinging to how things should be, we set an intention to meet each moment with openness and curiosity. And last but not least, we recognize that others, just like ourselves, are subject to impermanence and interdependence. And this shared reality helps deepen our connection to each other, helps foster empathy and compassion for others. It inspires acts of kindness because we understand the ripple effect. We understand that we want to partake of that kindness. So I hope that it's become clear this morning that emptiness, as understood in Buddhism, is not a denial of life. Rather, it's a deeper appreciation of the true nature of life. By recognizing that all phenomena are impermanent and interrelated, we free ourselves from many of the delusions that cause suffering. Because this insight into emptiness allows us to live with greater wisdom, with greater compassion and ease. Because we engage with life as it is rather than as we wish it to be, which I say often. We engage with life as it is rather than as we wish it to be. So far from being a source of despair, the teachings of emptiness are an invitation to embrace life with an open heart and a clear mind. So those are some thoughts this morning on emptiness.